Hello, everybody. It's great to have you here today for our program, What Matters to Me and Why. We are excited. This is our 11th season. It's great space to have you guys here and also the folks on Zoom, so welcome. My name is Kevin Bossenmeyer. I'm a public affairs host, interviewer on KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine. And I'm excited for our speaker today. She's Vice Provost and Dean of all things Graduate Division, Graduate Department, Graduate Education. So it's going to be great to have her. 6 months ago, I had the opportunity and pleasure to interview her. At the end of the interview, I just decided to say that you are a dynamo on the run. So I'm excited to hear what her perspective is as a dynamo on the run and looking at it in terms of what matters to me and why. So within the next 24 hours, you'll receive an email in your box with a few short questions that helps us with reviewing and helps us for future planning. So if you could fill that out and return it, we'd really appreciate it. And at the end of our program, as you're leaving, you'll get a free lunch. So yeah, there is such a thing as a free lunch. So, all right. How many of you have been, or how many of you, this is your first What Matters to Me and Why? Oh, wow, fantastic to have you here. And I know we have some on Zoom also. So our speaker series is designed to give people at UCI an opportunity to hear from each other on a more personal level. So every month we invite a faculty member or staff to come and talk about what matters to them and why. And then we ask them that simple question. We ask them to bring authenticity and just see where it's going to go. And oftentimes, because of the diversity of our population here on campus, it is all over the place, but oftentimes it's eye-opening and inspiring. So we're looking forward to it today. I'd like to acknowledge the Office of the Chancellor and the Campus Climate Council for their continued support for our speaker series. We're very grateful. And we're now a franchise. We have not only this main What Matters to Me and Why, but also in the School of Medicine and alumni. So if you want more information about that, go to UCI, What Matters to Me and Why. And there's also all our past presentations over the last 10 years. And in a moment, Rachel Correll, our Administrative Program Manager in the Dean's Office of the School of Medicine, will introduce the Vice Provost, Gillian. But first, we have a tradition in What Matters to Me and Why that we take 90 seconds to introduce ourselves to each other. So go ahead and do it right now, and it'll go fast. Please.
I'm so glad. Hopefully you had some fun meeting your neighbors, whether in person or virtually on Zoom. I am Rachel Correll. I'm a staff member in the UCI School of Medicine Dean's Office, and I am here today to welcome our Vice Provost. Before I do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. When chatting about this event in advance, there were a number of jokes between us about how she would be singing and dancing her way through it. And the desire to strike the boring, usual intro bio and replace it with something a little bit more about our relationship and about who she is. So I hope I'm not over-promising and under-delivering, but I'm going to focus less on her accolades, Vice Provost for Graduate Education, Dean of the Graduate Division, Professor in the Schools of Information and Computer Science, Education and Medicine. You guys can take a look at her phenomenal professional bio on her website, LinkedIn, faculty profile, the What Matters to Me and Why email invitation. But what I want to talk a little bit more is about how when I met Gillian as a little bit younger staff member here about 7 years ago, I knew that I would like her. She was bubbly, kind, loved cakes and food, and truly cared about individuals. Over a number of meetings related to community engagement and strategic planning, I learned how essential service is to her. She works to inspire those around her to give back to others in ways that best suits their strengths. If you're a student, she'll help find you mentors and resources for your research. If you're faculty, she'll write you brilliant recommendations. If you're staff like me, she'll motivate you to find the area where you can do the greatest good and coach you to do even more. She doesn't just talk the talk, but walks the walk. Whether in her role in administration at UCI, as CEO and Director of Innovation in the business aviation industry, or as a volunteer with the OC School of the Arts, Teen Kids, or Junior League, Gillian is out there giving 200% to her students, mentees, employees, and community. And now, please join me. I've got even more written here, but I think we all want to hear from her instead. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Gillian Hayes to the podium.
She definitely overpromised. I'll try not to underdeliver. I'm going to start today with a poem, I Am Only One, by Edward Everett Hale. Many of you have probably heard this. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something I can do. So I believe in two fundamental truths. Number one, everything can always be better. My students will tell you that I believe that. Coffee placement can be better. And number two, each and every one of us has a responsibility to do what part we can to make it better. So underlying all of that is a commitment to hear from voices that we don't always hear from and to work very, very, very hard. I was born in the late 1970s in like a bouquet of polyester and excitement about what the world might become. It was the dawning of what we call the information age. And while we certainly had struggles as a family, I was really fortunate because I was born into a household that could afford a personal computer at home. And it's not a given today, and it was definitely not a given back then. So I wrote my first computer program with the help of my big sister, who's only 4'11", so not that big. But she's also now an ex-lawyer turned executive coach, and she absolutely despises technology, but she helped me pull out our yellow legal pad and write out our first program, and then type it into an Apple II. For those of you who know that your history in computing, Apple IIs are amazing because they boot directly into BASIC, which means you can start writing a program immediately. You don't have to like download libraries and development environments and do all these other things. You just start writing code. It also means that if you're an 8-year-old who knows nothing about programming, you will wind up writing loops that don't close and eating up all the memory and crashing the computer, which I did repeatedly. But I knew that I was in love until I hit middle school. And then like so many other girls before me, right? My typing teacher told me, girls take typing, not programming. And then my homeroom teacher told me, well, okay, if you really like science that much, I guess like take some bio, take some chemistry, maybe you can be a doctor, but you're definitely not gonna be an engineer. And so off I went to college, convinced that like, I'm still gonna use science to do good. It was the 90s, I was absolutely convinced I was gonna be the one to cure AIDS. I was desperate to make some kind of difference through science. And so I double majored in molecular biology and mathematics. And then two things happened that took me off that track. Number one, I was again super fortunate, in this case, to work for Anthony Fauci at the NIH. Yes, that Dr. Fauci. And at the time, he was running the AIDS lab there. And it turns out, like, I'm a really bad biologist. Do we have any molecular biologists in the room? George, there you go. I'm bad at this. I have no patience for this, right? And when your cultures grow mold or other things because you weren't quite detailed enough, it's really bad. You have to start all over. And meanwhile, all I desperately wanted to do was I would beg my mentor, can we go down to the area where the patients are giving their blood? Because all I wanted to do, HIV was super stigmatized at the time, and all I wanted to do was hear the stories from the people who are there giving their blood. And I was miserable and bored in the lab. I can't overestimate how bad I was at this. And then I lost my favorite pair of shoes because there was radioactive stuff that dripped on them and I wasn't careful enough. And so I just this was not for me. So I went back to college and then second thing happened. I had to take organic chemistry. And then I had to retake organic chemistry. And figuring out that you're not particularly good at something at the exact same moment that you realize you actually don't like it either is a pretty powerful thing to have happen while you're in college. And this is why I love people who change majors, like do it. So I sat down with my course catalog. They were, the big books back then, and I'm flipping back and forth through all the pages, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. If I finished with a math major only, I would finish a semester early. I really liked college. I was having fun. I did not want to finish a semester early. If I picked up any double major on campus, other than the molecular biology major I was already in, which I think we can all agree was a no, or computer science, which overlapped heavily with math, if I picked up any other double major, I'd be there an extra semester. And nobody was paying for an extra semester at Vanderbilt. It's very expensive. So I became a computer scientist. And that is how that happened. It turned out I absolutely thrived in my CS classes, right? They were just the right amount of math and science nerdiness, but also they worked really quickly. You could very rapidly make a thing. And I thought, wow, I can make this thing compile and maybe I can do some good in the world. And if there's the expression, the whole world looks like a nail if you have a hammer. Computer science in the 1990s was a huge hammer. It was the moment we thought that the only thing that was missing from saving the world was a really well-written computer program. And so I was super excited about this, right? And I loved everything that I experienced with computer science, except some of the other people. And I think it's important, particularly for the women in the room, that we talk about that a little bit. So back then, I still thought that when people told me you don't look like a computer scientist, that was a compliment. It's not a compliment. I endured, as many women will tell you, my fair share of men physically moving me out of the way so they could get to the keyboard, or figuratively moving me out of the way and taking credit for work that I was doing, being asked out by clients and partners when I started working in the consulting world, all the other things that you've heard about in tech. And unfortunately, computing's still a pretty toxic place for women and minorities. And that's a much longer discussion. But suffice it to say, I'm pretty resilient. I've had a lot of really good therapists over the years. And I did then and still now find it irresistible to just nerd out and write code. It's beautiful. And if you can do some good with that, all the better. And so now I get to do research that really matters and that I love. And when I'm happiest, I'm in the field. I'm going to put in the field in quotes because field work for me now is often virtual. But doing really messy work, right? Talking to patients at Chalk about what kinds of software we might build, or co-designing new technologies with parents and teachers in an autism classroom. Or more recently, for the grad students in the room, I love visiting with our grad students during my office hours, because these places are where I can hands-on work with other people to solve really thorny problems. And that's what I love to do. So I want to talk, Rachel kind of queued this up for me. She didn't tell me what she was going to say, but good job, Rachel. Truly engaged research partnerships, this is what I really fundamentally believe in at my core. And that requires equity for a lot of people. And with their usual caveats about exceptions, because there's lots of them, I do want to note that this is something that universities are just not really great at. And if you doubt me, I want you to consider for a moment what it takes to get a community partner to our campus to engage on a research project that uses campus resources. Where are they going to park? How are they going to find their way around the buildings, especially during construction when the pathways don't match the maps? And it's always during construction. What if we want them to be able to access research data and therefore be on one of our IRB protocols? And what if we want them to be able to access the papers we eventually write that, by the way, are sitting behind paywalls that you have to be on our library to get a hold of? Right? So the truth is, whatever our commitments, we remain like many scientific communities, and despite all of our best efforts, we struggle with this kind of inclusion. But it's not just about research engagement, right? Research on campus goes well beyond engagement. There's lots of people in this room that are not researchers. Building on the existing ethos of service that UCI has had, we've done some major things in recent years. So several years ago, UCI undertook an effort to positively impact our community through the annual MLK Day of Service. Has anyone ever done that Day of Service? A few of you, okay. Thousands of employees every year and students work together, and they spend a day off working in the community, and that's pretty amazing. And this is just one step in what I see as a very long line of efforts that the university has put forward, including things like the creation of the Newkirk Center and the Blum Center and Engage UCI and the Center for Engaged Partnerships and Social Ecology Field Study, and on it goes, right? I can name a ton of these wonderful things. And just so you don't think that I'm talking about universities alone, corporations have been doing these things and they have a big responsibility to give back as well. I was fortunate that more than 20 years ago, way back when I was at Deloitte, I was able to be one of the leaders of the first Impact Day that Deloitte did in the Atlanta office. And the partner in charge of that effort saw in me this little spunky analyst that was a little too uppity for her own good. He saw this belief that I had, though, that things can always be better, and we have a commitment to do something about it. So harnessing that energy asked me to take on this role as one of the leaders. And I looked this up a few years ago and was so thrilled to see that Impact Day carries on, right? And it's spread beyond the Atlanta office. And the Deloitte community has more than 250,000 employees, right? So this small thing can turn into huge impact. And Deloitte's not alone, right? Lots of corporations do days of service. They do days of remembrance. This happens globally. Universities and corporations both give back a lot, and that is wonderful. They also benefit from this. Universities are ranked in part by the hours of volunteer work that we can document. And corporations and celebrities profit off of all this press. So we do have a fundamental question to ask ourselves, and it's something I ask myself regularly. How do we reconcile the personal and organizational benefits of this kind of service with our quest for real positive community outcomes and real commitments to make things better? And as you might imagine, there are researchers that study this, not me, but other folks. And they have found that nonprofits and NGOs do tend to be pretty happy with the help they get from volunteers and service learners. Great. And the people giving their time also tend to be really happy with the experience. They learn a lot. It's good. This is all really wonderful. But it's not without its challenges, and I just think it's important for us to always be seeing those. So Randy Stoker and Elizabeth Tryon wrote a great book called The Unheard Voices that talks about how nonprofits get exhausted by the rapid turnover of volunteers. They are always training them and supporting them and then getting a new class the next year. And nonprofits are always hustling. They're always after the next grant. They might have to pivot an entire service model on the basis of a funder. And that doesn't really work very well with those of us in the university who want to do these long-term research projects, or with service learners who need some commitment for engagement. So there's just some tensions there. And Bacon in 2002 noted that community organizers tend to see themselves as learners. They link learning to action with what they're doing, and they see learning as a collective activity that they're doing together with their volunteers, with their community with their university partners, and so on. Now, faculty, on the other hand, I know there's a lot of us in the room. We tend to see ourselves as experts. We are the creators and the makers of knowledge, and we are the holders of knowledge that we will generously impart upon you, our students and community partners who would like to learn from us. So these kinds of tensions can make these partnerships hard. And years before these observations, John Ebbe wrote a really damning piece titled "Why Service Learning is Bad," which pretty provocative statement. But in that work, he notes that poor communities are often exploited as places of learning. And I can tell you from my own personal experiences that universities often leave a trail of wreckage behind them in these communities. As a graduate student at Georgia Tech, there was a massive tension between the Black community that we were using basically as a research site and the largely white, middle class, and almost entirely male group of students at Georgia Tech that are studying and working with these communities. And that tension could be felt every time you went into the community to interact. And I want to call out, for all kinds of reasons, but Chris Ledantek and Carl DeSalvo and a bunch of others at Georgia Tech have worked over the last 15 years since I've been gone on healing those wounds. And I think they've made a lot of progress. And we have the same kind of issues here at UC Irvine. Right? So I have lost count of the number of times that I've sat with a teacher in Compton or a mom in Santa Ana or someone else, and they've said to me, "Wow, you're different. You actually work with us. You care what we think." And that's not what we necessarily want to have people thinking about universities. And again, UCI has been doing amazing things, the Research Justice Shop, the Ocean Initiative in education, and so on. They're all working to heal these wounds, but the wounds are deep, and they are there, and they've been there for generations. So we have work to do. And things can be better, and we have a responsibility to make them better. So it makes me think a lot about how we measure and think about community engagement. So years of task forces, some of which I think Rachel was involved in, led to the Volunteer Leadership Summit in 2014. For those of you that were here, you may remember it. And during that, the chancellor said some really profound words. He said that we needed to develop our community-focused programs to grow as a what he called anchoring institution in the region. And he passionately decried the kind of preeminence to which we aspire requires bold visions that inspire exciting, impactful partnerships. The future of the university rests on our collective shoulders. And that is inspiring. I was excited. But if we sit back and we really reflect, right, UCI lives within a system with biases towards research outcomes over community outcomes at every conference, in every journal, in every grant cycle, and therefore in every day of our work that is not explicitly a day of service. And we can't fix the system alone. It would be ridiculous to think that we could. No one scholar or university can just be like, nah, we're not gonna do those publications things anymore. That's over, right? No one worker can just like ignore the standards by which they are judged across society. And I just wanna note, like, I'm in an immense position of privilege. You've heard all my titles, right? I have all these things. I have tenure, I have an endowed chair. I work at a major research university in a wealthy state, in a wealthy country. I'm white, I'm middle class, and I'm the daughter of 2 people with PhDs. I am married to possibly the most supportive husband in the world who is here today. He makes me laugh. He does more than his fair share of home and child care. He challenges me to think about things differently. So I'm sitting here swimming in privilege. And even I can't just say, like, forget it, I'm not gonna do those research publications anymore. And it's not clear that I would want to. There's a lot of value in the things that we already measure. But it means that I have to spend nights and weekends doing my second job of being a professor, while my days are filled with my vice provost and mom and sister and wife jobs. And it means that we have major structural issues that are gonna have to be addressed if we wanna actually ensure that the communities that we study, the communities where our students go to learn, the communities that we claim to serve, we have work to do to make sure that they are not exploited like natural resources for the harvesting. So beyond all these scholarly metrics that we measure all the time, we have to start measuring community outcomes really seriously. And we have to report those. And then the reports have to actually matter to us, and matter to our colleagues, and matter to the university, and matter to the world. So our words in support of the community are just gonna stay words if we don't show the level of respect and prestige to a professor who's taking service learning and participatory research as seriously as those who we elect to scientific societies. This is super not easy. I'm not gonna stand here and claim that it's easy, but it comes in tiny steps over a long time. And one of those tiny steps has already happened here, and I'm super impressed by it. This is a line that was added to a very important form. The faculty in the room will know. The form in question is the AP10. This is the form that we all fill out diligently every few years so that our peers can assess how well we're doing as faculty. And several years ago, in an effort to support community engagement, the AP10 had a line added that explicitly asks about what you do to serve the community. And that's a tiny but unbelievably important step, right? One step at a time, we can eventually change hundreds of years of scientific tradition. These kinds of small steps are why I took this job as grad dean. I cannot tell you the number of times people ask me, by the way, why I was willing to take this job. This is like the most common thing when I was applying for it. Why do you want that job? To be fair, I did not know I was gonna have a global pandemic within a few months of taking the job. Might have thought differently about it, I don't know. But that aside, right, I really like to solve thorny problems, and I am committed to this idea that small changes every day are how we really make progress and solve those thorny problems. And so supporting our students, helping the grad division staff grow into the amazing people they're gonna be, partnering with the Senate to break down all of our inefficiencies and figure out where we can work better together. These are all things I get to do every day in service of making the university a better place. I also get to give talks like this one, where I get to tell all of you that you should go make the university a better place, that we can partner to make things better. So that's why I took the job. then you might wonder what I want to do next. I think a good next step for all of us is really to focus on inclusion. So I'm going to give you one example. Every single person in this room will be disabled at some point in your lives. That is just a fact. Every one of you. And while COVID definitely taught us a lot about how to be more inclusive in our work and in our learning, it's not done teaching us, and we cannot let our progress stop here. We cannot have gone through the 3 years of hell that we all just went through and not have it mean something, not have things change in some way. And I do want to note that UCI is super far ahead when it comes to these issues. So I'm happy to critique what we do, but our focus on hybrid and remote work as part of what we've been doing in Work Reimagined leads most of our peer universities. And the outreach programs that I go hear about from the other grad deans look exactly like things we've been doing for a decade or more. And they're just starting them and they're super excited, right? And our resource centers, I think Vice Chancellor Banks is here. He runs more resource centers. I mean, this is the envy of everyone in the US, the amount of support that we have for our minoritized students, our undocumented students, women, and so on. But this is all to say we still have work to do. We can make our experiences, despite all the amazing things that we do, we can make these things even more accessible, we can make them more inclusive, and we do have a responsibility to do that. And beyond our campus, I'm a computer scientist still, and our discipline is really still struggling. Over the last 20 years, you can look at the graphs, this is just facts, the numbers of white men in computer science majors have skyrocketed. Every other group has remained flat. And I was elected recently this year to the Computing Research Association board, and I was asked at my first board meeting, why did you take this position? Why do you want to do this? Which apparently is the most common thing people ask me is, why would you do this thing? But I said to them, when I look at the classes that we teach, and they look the same as 25 years ago when I took these classes and I was the only woman in them, and I swore that that would change, I've failed, and we have failed as a discipline. And I worry a lot about the experiences that my students are having, some of whom are here right now. Computing is still often a dangerous place for women and minoritized groups. So one of the primary rules for success in my lab, my students will confirm this for you, is do not bring a bathing suit to an academic conference. Maybe that's a weird rule. Why is that the rule? There is no story that starts with, well, we were in a hot tub, that ends in a way that is good for a woman. And our minoritized women are in even more danger for their reputations, for their physical safety, and more. And I mentioned this rule once in a conference keynote several years ago. And the number of people that came up to me afterwards and said, oh, here's the rules that I have to keep my students safe. Or, wow, I wish you had been my advisor and you had given me that rule because this thing happened to me. It was shocking. And that's a really big problem because it takes us to a larger issue, which is that we know that a lot of the funding for brand new large tech companies starts in hot tubs and steam rooms and a bunch of other places that I don't go and I don't let my students go. And so I don't make these rules lightly. They come from years of hard-won lessons in my own life. And they remind me that things can be better. And I have a responsibility to make them better. And all of you do too. And if you are in this room and you are at this university, I'm going to assume you basically want to do good things. There's no way that you came here today unless you're pretty much in that position. You want to be inclusive. You want to support a variety of people. But it's super hard, right, to be good and to do better. What do these things even mean? And it's super hard to acknowledge systems of oppression that are largely invisible and are hugely beneficial to a bunch of us in this room. And it's hard to keep feeling like a good person when you realize that you're benefiting from these systems. And so what often happens is we bring people in, those who are oppressed, and we ask them to be a part of our community, and then they spend their time telling us, don't worry, you're a good person, it's okay, and comforting us. So instead, I suggest that everyone needs to own their part in the structural forces that keep us reinforcing the status quo. And owning it means we got to start talking about it, which we have been doing over the last few years, which is amazing, and we need to keep those conversations going. And if we want to build the community we want, we have to acknowledge our privilege and our responsibility. And I just want to note, even those of you that come from all kinds of different backgrounds, right? If you are here, we are all privileged. We work or study at a top university in a wealthy state, in a wealthy country. And we have basically perfect weather. Thank you, weather, for improving so I could make that joke today. And I also want to acknowledge all the people who aren't here, some of whom are on Zoom, but I really mean the ones who are not here at all, right? Those whose visas were never issued, those who don't have affordable childcare and they're home wrangling kids right now, those who work multiple jobs while they're going to school, and so the idea of coming to like one more thing at UCI is just too much. And those who are so affected by our current staffing shortages that they just can't leave their desk for even an hour. We need to think about those people too. Because if we don't talk about it, we don't think about it, we don't address it, we wind up doing harm to the very groups that we're trying to bring in. Rachel Cargill, I found this tweet years ago and I just love it. This young Black woman studying anthropology said, "Unless the racism is addressed and eradicated in the places you are looking to make diverse, you are simply bringing people of color into violent and unsafe spaces." And I think about this a lot. Right? We're trying so hard to diversify graduate education here. I struggle with what are the moral and ethical responsibilities of bringing students into all of our environments, and I want to make sure that these are safe, great environments for them. And I think about this when I get asked to speak at like girls in computing workshops. Should I tell another generation of girls that they should just persist, just be resilient, when I haven't changed things for them before they get there? I don't know. These are not easy answers for any of us. And the challenges experienced by those we seek to bring in are not to be underestimated. And UC Irvine, I can't say it enough, we are way ahead of the curve of where most universities are on these issues. But sometimes even that is not enough to help people really thrive. So things can be better, and we have a responsibility collectively to make them better. Now, I'm a ridiculous optimist. A dear friend, Paul Durish, who many of you know, who once gave one of these What Matters to Me Why talks several years ago in the before times, he said to me once, "Do cartoon birds just like circle your head all the time? Because I'm so optimistic about these things." And I remain optimistic, right? I just ran down a ton of challenges, but I do remain optimistic. I couldn't do the research I do. I certainly couldn't be grad dean if I wasn't optimistic. But being optimistic doesn't mean ignoring the pain you see or pretending that everything's okay. What I'm optimistic about is that I'm committed to doing the work. And I know a whole lot of other people who are too, who get up every day and do the work. And I'm also optimistic because I truly believe in the power of flawed people to do good things. So President Obama gave a speech maybe 4 or 5 years ago as part of his foundation in which he said, this idea of purity, you're never compromised. You should get over that really quickly. The world is messy. There are ambiguities. People who do really good stuff have flaws. And then he went on to talk about calling people out and throwing stones and why critique can be easy but problematic. And I'll just finish that thought by saying that doing the work is what's hard, right? UC Irvine can lead the way, but we have to do the work. And structural changes can start anywhere. So I want to challenge all of you to start doing that work today. Think about what changes you and we can make today. Where are you going to go and stand between the oppressor and the oppressed, even in a small way? How are you going to have tough conversations? Listen when people give us critique. I get a lot of critique as grad dean. The skill is listening and hearing people. And for those of you making the critiques, just a reminder to please be generous. We're all in this together. Criticism is really easy. Constructive critique is a little harder. And doing the work is really hard. So let's work together to hear one another, to read things generously, and to collectively determine our future. People talk about the university like it's this thing. The university is people, it's us. And we control our destiny. The people here in this room, out there on the lawn, in these halls, on this campus. So we have to commit to collective self-determination, to a world in which we together decide what is important, what matters to us and why. We have to create the university we want, the one that enables us to live our values, a university that is both intentional and committed. So I'm going to leave you with one more poem, this one by Rebecca Puig. Remember when you go into the world to keep your eyes and ears wide open. Be kind. Love one another. Take care of each other. Tell the truth. Always do your best. Listen to the big people and the little people. Explore new paths and have fun. Know that you are loved like crazy. Give thanks for all your blessings. Above all else, love, and you will do wonderful things in the world. Should we do questions? I'm told there are questions, or question time. There may be no questions.
We will do questions next. Thank you so much for your incredible story and for sharing what matters to you and why. I think all of you can see why I've been so inspired for the last 7 years working with Dr. Hayes. So at this point, we would like to open it up for questions. Kevin and I will have microphones that if you would like to raise your hand, we can bring to you. Please wait until the microphone comes to you so that we can record your question on the video. If you are out there on Zoom land, go ahead and raise your virtual hand, and or you can type your question in the chat as well. So with that, we'd like to open us up with the first question. Don't be shy.
Way back.
Sorry.
I think they're going to make you say it in the mic so they can hear you on camera.
Right here.
So we'll wait.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really insightful. I just wanted to ask, what was your biggest risk in life that you took?
That is a huge question. That's tough. So I should start by saying I'm super risk averse, right? So I'm probably the most risk averse person who's ever run a startup. And the only reason I did was because I was on leave from the university and I knew I could come back if it all went really terribly wrong. So that gives you a sense of how risk averse I am as a general rule. Biggest risk. Well, I'm probably going to say getting married, and not just because my husband's in the room, but like picking a partner for life is not a small thing. And we've been together now for 17 years, which is amazing because I don't think I had a relationship last 17 months before him. And I know a lot of folks who've been through divorce or been through other really tough situations, and I actually think that's a really risky thing. Physically, I will tell you, I didn't know it at the time, but the riskiest thing I ever did was have kids, so that's not great. But maternal mortality is something we can talk about another time. Same spot. You gotta run. Now they're just messing with you.
Hi.
Hi.
Besides not bring a bathing suit to a conference, what other advice would you give other minorities as well as women to navigate this space that isn't necessarily women friendly or minority friendly?
That's a great question. So that's both a great question because she's my student and so everything she says is brilliant, but also I think this is really tricky. So I'm going to answer your question in a little interesting way, which is more to say advice for all of the faculty and staff and postdocs in the room who might be supporting junior grad students. I think one of the things we can do is help them know who's safe. So I've gotten a little sloppy about this during COVID because virtual conferences, et cetera. But one of the things that I used to do is talk to students before they go to a conference, like who do you want to meet while you're there? And then there's a lot that comes through Whisper Networks and being senior and knowing maybe not with that person, but let's see who else we can have you talk to, and then making some of those introductions so it's not so awkward and you don't have to like trot up to someone. One of my students, the very first conference they went to, they were stopped by security because they were not a white man and they didn't look like they belonged, and that really upset me. And so that's another case where I had some long talks with the conference organizers and so on about what had happened, like why aren't we checking name tags for other people? And I just think those are the moments where those of us, particularly if you have tenure already, like you got to call people out and you got to talk about these things, because can't be done on the backs of the students and the junior folks. We have that responsibility. And for the junior people, I would say, everybody's got a different relationship with their advisor. So if you have an advisor that you feel like, I can talk to them about this and tell them these are the people that I want to meet with, great. If not, find someone else, whether it's a senior student or a postdoc in your lab, or there's someone else on the faculty that you can talk to about who should I be meeting, who's a good ally, who's going to help me, and who's going to sort of walk me around and make sure I meet the right people. Oh, wow, there's 2 of me. I did not know that had happened.
Thank you, Gillian. So following up on the last question, what advice do you have for the people in positions of privilege and power in the room? So maybe the white male professors. What would you like to see them be doing to kind of create changes?
Great. Lee wants me to tell a bunch of white men what to do. That's fun. Okay. So a couple things. So one is, I think one of the things I love about my own advisor, who is a white man, is like he holds everyone to the same bar quality-wise. And I think that's really important, right? Like, so none of this, I'm trying to be inclusive, so I'm not going to like have these tough conversations and tell them when they're not cutting it. Like, we still need to have the exact same quality conversations and be able to have those tough conversations. I think that's actually really important. But at the same time, it is also a matter of like, when you see a man talking over a woman or someone, or a person of color in a meeting, like stop them. There's a grad dean at UC San Diego. I'm assuming he's not watching this, but if anyone knows Jim Antony, you can tell him I said this. He is a master at like when a woman says something in a meeting and then someone else afterwards basically repeats it, says the same thing. You've all had this experience. Jim will stop them and be like, so as Gillian just said, da 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 da. And like, it's a tiny thing, but it's really meaningful. Like, I've seen him do it so many times for so many women, and I finally pulled him aside at a meeting we were at recently and just said, Jim, I don't know if you even know you're doing this, but like, this is a really powerful, wonderful thing you're doing. And it might seem like a tiny thing, but that's what I mean. All those tiny steps, they add up. I'm not expecting everyone to like run out and like burn down the tenure system. I wouldn't want to do that. But we can do tiny things to make sure that everything is a little bit more equitable.
Is this thing on? Thank you for giving the talk. It was really inspirational to hear from someone who was in a position that I am in now. And my question for you is, if you could go back in time to when you were in college, and if you could say something to your college self who had just chosen to take on computer science, what would you say to her?
I'd probably tell college me to simmer down a little. I know this is shocking to all of you that know me, but I was pretty feisty back then. I thought I knew a lot that I didn't know. I thought a lot of things were outrageous that now I'm like, I understand what's happening here, and I can sort of see the pattern. So I think that's the first thing I would tell college me. The other thing I would tell college me is like, you don't have to take it. When like all the guys on the team tell you that the strip clubs where we're going for lunch, you can say, no, we're not doing that. And I didn't know that. So I guess I want to say that to all the other women here, like, you can say no, and you should. And if they don't accept your no, especially computer scientists, there's a lot of other jobs out there. Like, we will find you another place. And maybe that's not true for everyone, and people are sometimes in more precarious employment than others, but you don't have to take things that are uncomfortable, abusive, or otherwise problematic. And I did not know that when I was that age.
We've got a question on Zoom. I'll read it out to you. It's from Chris Wolf. It says, hi, Gillian.
Hi, Chris.
I love your framework of the world can be better, and we have a responsibility to make it better. How do you handle conflict around how we define better, or how we prioritize the order we go about making things better?
Chris is a very good researcher, so of course she asks this. Oh, there she is. Hi. Better. Yeah, it's super important to know what your metrics are. So like, what do we actually mean by better? And actually, Joseph Morales, Dr. Morales here, he and I were talking about this right before. It's like, there are certain things that are really easy to measure, right? Like what percentage of first-gen students do we have at the university? We can measure that. Are they graduating on time? We can measure that too. If they're not graduating on time, we want them to get closer to graduating on time. That's a definition of better. These are really easy. But there's a whole bunch of squishy stuff out there that we actually want to be better. And I think that's what's really hard. So I'm very grateful that we have both qualitative and quantitative scientists out there who can study these things. And for me, the ultimate goal, right, is that everyone feels able to do and be their personal best, whatever that means for you. That's super squishy. I recognize it's also a very big goal. But when I think about our students here or junior faculty I mentor or anyone else, it's about what is the life you want to lead? What is the best life for you? And how do we empower you to get there for you as an individual? And that might mean very different things for different people. And prioritizing, oh God. You know, I always think about what are the things I can do right now? That's a big priority for me. What are the things that we can actually make a tiny bit of progress on right now? While always trying to think about what our long-term goals are. But I just feel like you never know how long you have in this life. So let's do what little bit we can do in this moment.
Good to see you. It's a good talk.
Hi. Yeah, that was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. So for those of us who are in like fieldwork placement classes and series and things like that, we do talk somewhat about like cultural competency and humility. Are there like certain things like central tenets that are like the most important you find to making sure when we're doing these research placements that we are bringing more good to them than we are just ourselves? Like what's like the central thing that really helped you and helps other researchers, you know?
That's a great question. So one of the things that I talk a lot about when you're establishing a new community partnership, and for all kinds of reasons, this step doesn't always happen, but in an ideal world, you sit down and for however long it takes, you create a vision for the project. And I know it sounds cheesy, like, oh, visioning, yes, but really sit down and say, I have important goals that I have as a researcher, as a student, as someone who wants to finish my major and graduate, whatever the thing might be. You have important goals as someone working in the community, and we need to create a vision that together meets some set of each of those goals. And the research justice folks, I think, are here, and they do a lot of this work as well, and they're really quite good at it. But it's about setting that agreement out ahead of time. You are never going to meet everyone's goals. It's just not realistic. There's no research project in this world that's going to solve every problem that your community partner has. And likewise, there's always more research to be done. Like there's nothing a community partner is going to say that's going to, your career is very long. You have lots of research to do. So at each time, for me, it's about setting up those agreements ahead of time. And then also thinking about what are the outputs, right? So our outputs are very clear. It's like a paper for your class or a paper submitted to a journal or it's all writing, right, of some kind. But there's outputs that community partners care about. Maybe it's a product of some kind that they need. Maybe it's a presentation to their board of directors. Maybe it's a flashy infographic that they can share with funders and other folks. But in that visioning session, you can figure that out and commit ahead of time. These are the outputs that we're going to do together. I actually think these are similar kinds of things that what we do when we do interdisciplinary collaborations and so on. But that piece is really huge. The other thing that I think is really important, and this is going to sound ridiculous because I've just spent like 45 minutes talking at you and being like totally dominant in this conversation, but when I look at a first-year student's interview transcript, one of the first things I do is look at how many lines are them and how many lines is the person they're interviewing. And invariably, the first time, it's a whole bunch of them because we're super uncomfortable with silence as humans. And so we just keep filling it in for the person that you're trying to interview. So get real comfortable with silence. If you want to really hear what someone, particularly someone who may have lesser power and authority than you, and you may feel like, oh, I'm just a student. Yeah, okay, but you're a student at the University of California, so that puts you up here. When you are interviewing people like that, get real comfortable with silence. And then it makes the space for them to be able to talk and for you to be able to hear.
We've got one more question on Zoom. Hi, Gillian. This is Seaway from Civil Engineering. Thank you very much for your presentation. What are some of your inner strength that directs your life? What is your God?
Wow! Rachel, you're supposed to vet these before you read them to me. That is super hard. What is my inner strength? I sleep a lot. Like, it's really important. And like everyone in my family will tell you, if I get less than 6 hours of sleep, like watch out, it's not gonna go well for you. And I think that's, sort of, you talk about mindfulness and meditation and so on, like rest, be centered, be who you are. I find when I do go to religious services, that's what I'm doing, is I'm like resting and being centered. And so that is sort of a North Star for me. Snuggles with my little boys and my dog, my little boys and my very big dog. It's all about restoration, right? You can only run so hard for so long, and then you have to rest. And actually, I've just completely blanked her name. Sarah Mednick has a great book on this that you should all read. Okay.
Last question.
Hello. Your presentation has been really great. It's been really enlightening. I know for a lot of students, like just coming into university, I'm a second-year student. A lot of us are like busy dealing with like discovering ourselves and our interests, just like you, and like figuring out what works for us, and then there's other students who are like busy like working jobs to help like finance their stay here. And for all of us, we're like really busy looking into ourselves and figuring out about us, but because of that, we're like not really like looking at all these other problems about how we could be helping with the university. So what would you recommend as like a first step for us to like, I guess, make things better?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, be generous to yourselves. If you're in your second year of university this year, that means that you spent most of your junior year, all of your senior year online, and your freshman year doing whatever the heck we were doing last year. Like, whew, that is really tough. So be generous to yourself is the first thing I would say. If you don't notice the outside world for a little while, okay, that's okay. It's also super normal, right? This is one of the jokes in our household, is that like when we were in college, nuclear war could have like broken out and we wouldn't have known if it wasn't happening like on our campus. And that's also okay, right? Part of going to college is being a part of this community and being here. And so maybe you just do something to like tutor someone in one of your classes that's struggling a little bit. Or, unfortunately, we do have students who you have to use services like the Fresh Hub and so on here, and maybe you give a little bit of volunteer time for one of those kinds of services here on campus. There's a lot of opportunities where you can help the community you are the tightest to. I don't think we all have to be going and like solving the war in Ukraine or genocide in Tigray. Like, we can do little things right here to make the world a little bit better right now. But mostly be generous with yourself. It's been a tough few years.
Thank you for being here. Are we done? I'm done. A few housekeeping things before you all leave and get your boxed lunches outside. A big thank you again to Dr. Hayes for her insightful words and for being our featured speaker today. A big thank you to the What Matters to Me and Why Organizing Committee and the Advisory Council on Campus Climate, Culture, and Inclusion. And finally, my personal plea to you, please do take the surveys when you receive it in email. Our committee is always looking for great speakers like Dr. Hayes to do this series in the future. And you can be anything, anyone, you can have any matters to you and why, but we're always looking for great people to come up here and be brave and to speak about what matters to them. So please do take the survey, let us know your suggestions for both speakers and the program, and I'll let you all get off to the rest of your day. Thank you for being here.